Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the second part of our GOTV and Election Day episode as part of our Running for Office series on Rethinking. So we're going to talk a little bit, now that we have a little bit of information about working up to Election Day, we're going to talk about Election Day itself. So this is a pretty exciting day. There's really nothing else like it. You think about even, I don't know, a basketball team going up to the championships. When you win the championship, you celebrate afterwards. On election day, you get a job if you win. And so it's just a really unique and crazy time for everybody involved in the campaign. We're going to try and break down some of the important things to be thinking about on election day to keep you focused on what matters most. So Aaron, welcome back again. Talk to us a little bit about election day strategy.
Great. Thank you, Alex. I think that one helpful way to think about Election Day is it is, your entire GOTV period of 3 to 5 days that we were just talking about compressed into, you know, 10 hours, the 10 hours that the polls are open or 11, whatever you have in your state. Um, and you thinking about trying to make as many voter contacts, as many passes through your GOTV universe as you did in the previous 3 days. So if you needed way more volunteers and volunteer shifts for GOTV than you had previously in your persuasion period prior to GOTV, now you need even more. And you may not get through that entire, universe multiple times on election day, but that's the goal. That's what you'd like to do. And there's an additional sort of data component, which is to refresh the list as you hear from voters that have already voted. And remember, if you're running in a small local race, Alex's race when he ran for mayor, we had what, like, I know we asked this in a previous episode, like 1,700 votes or something in that neighborhood. It's not crazy to say, you can muster enough volunteer energy, to contact 2,000 people on election day. But that's kind of the scale that you want to be thinking on. You want to be thinking about, I have dozens of people available to help me turn out the vote on election day. That's how you win. And so you have to really think about that compressed time frame. Everything needs to be very like pre-planned out as far as your walk lists, as far as the timing for volunteers to show up. I remember when I was working on the Obama campaign in 2008, and I keep going back to this campaign because this was one of the most impressive, GOTV efforts really in modern presidential campaign histories. And so, it was just I was working in it, but I was constantly like looking back and just in awe of what I was seeing. And on election day, we had a line out the door of 200 people that were lined up outside of our field office to get their walk packets. Now that was super exciting for a 9 a.m. shift. That was super exciting, but it was also terrifying as a field organizer because it presents a logistical hurdle of, the walk packets you need to go into the voter file and pull the lists, and you need to make sure that those are right and that the lists are formatted correctly, and they need to be printed and they need to be stapled together and they need to be put into packets with the talking points. And you got to give people a training, right? And how many people can you realistically give an effective training to? So all of this stuff, and I'm not saying your race is going to be that, big or that crazy, but think about all of the individual components. And hopefully you've been running field through your persuasion period and through GOTV. So your team is getting better at it. But it's got to be rock solid. It's got to run like clockwork on election day so that you can get people in and out and back in and back out. And you've got folks that are processing the data, and that's how you run a super well-oiled machine. And it starts with waking up early. I mean, on election day, it should be like the earliest you're waking up any day of the year should be on election day. Wake up at 4 in the morning. And that's because you got to do all this prep work. You should be doing the prep work the night before, but don't forget the night before is still GOTV, right? So that's the other thing about election day is you're coming off of 3 to 5 days of very intense get out the vote activity, where all this stuff is happening. So you need to have a really rock solid plan in place weeks in advance, and then you're going to have little time to kind of prepare for and execute that plan, which again brings us to waking up early, getting your offices ready, getting lists printed, double checking all the supplies and all the materials, making sure you've got everything, and then sending out volunteers for visibility before the polls open. Before you start knocking on doors or calling people in the morning, before the polls open, go out to those high traffic areas, and beat the other campaign as far as being more visible, and getting that energy and that momentum going early in the day. And then throughout the day, your field team is focused on processing all of those canvassing and phone banking shifts the way that I just described, and making sure that they're turning around new lists as the GOTV universe is shrinking because more people are voting. And you need to be focused on a few other activities that include measuring turnout. Um, you know, One way of measuring turnout is your actual volunteers going out and talking to people, as I just described, but you can also, depending on, the regulations in your municipality, in your county, in your state, you can have poll watchers, and you can have poll watchers that can actually receive turnout reports at different points during the day, so you can know, how many people have voted in what precinct, and based on those numbers, are you tracking towards, the election model, going back to that win number that we talked about earlier, are you tracking towards that kind of a turnout scenario, or is turnout very low? Maybe we need to redouble our efforts in a certain precinct to get more of our voters out, particularly if it's a precinct that you have a higher percentage of voters than the other candidates. So this is when we talk about election day strategy, all of that efficiency and preparation and planning that I discussed is to allow you to have an operation that is nimble enough to be able to say at noon, when you've got 5 hours of polls being open left, or more, 7 hours, whatever, to be able to look at the data and to say turnout is low in these 3 precincts. So for our afternoon shifts, rather than sending people to precincts A, B, and C, we're going to send people to precincts X, Y, and Z, and we need to send that directive out to our field teams that are at the staging locations that are have the voter file open to prepare new walk lists that we didn't have before, and to be able to give out that kind of very targeted guidance. Like, that is how you win elections, but you can't do it without a well-oiled machine, super prepared, super efficient operation that comes through, having folks that have been doing this for weeks already. So that is measuring turnout. Another program that I've seen work very effectively in local races is rides to the polls, getting older voters, getting voters with disabilities, providing them with opportunities to get to the polls, polling locations, particularly in a rural campaign or in a suburban campaign, going out to those senior centers and giving people a free option of transportation to the polls. And sometimes you can do that, in other communities, and it's just fun, right? And people just want to go together, and they're supporters of the campaign, and they want to go, with the campaign. And you can rent those 16-person, passenger vans, and get lots of people to the polls at the same time. It's a visibility thing. You can paint the vans, you can put signs in the vans. So that the rides to the polls, I think done right, can be very effective. It's pricey, and it really is going to depend on your race, obviously. So I would defer to your consultants on it. But that's another kind of exciting election day activity that I've seen done right. And then another one is the notion of having comfort captains, having people that are at the polls just making people happy, bringing them snacks, bringing them drinks, playing music. You can't campaign in most, I think most states, the regulation is you can't campaign within 100 feet of the polling location. So if they're being very visible, they need to act with your campaign um, paraphernalia. They need to sort of stay, 100 feet back. But for precincts where there's going to be long lines, or for precincts where people are gathering around, like having some kind of person that's in charge of bringing food, like that is also a tactic that I've seen work well in the past. So ideally, you've got all these programs really lined up and ready to go. You've got your field, you've got your visibility, you've got some of these sort of extracurricular programs that I just talked about, and all of it's been very well thought out, so that everyone is prepared with their roles and know what they're doing. And when it's all working, that allows you to be nimble and flexible based on turnout, based on what you're hearing from your voters, as you're sending volunteers out into the field, to prioritize your voter contact resources for later in the day, to be able to maximize turnout. Or again, it's all about maximizing the number of your supporters that you're able to get to the polls.
That's great. And so, on election day in South Orange, I spent most of the day, I think, outside of a couple of the polling places, the 100 or 200 feet away or whatever it was, talking to voters as they were coming in and trying to give them a last minute message. What should the candidate be doing on election day?
I think the candidate should be doing, more knocking on doors. I think the candidate should be out in the field and with the volunteers, and keeping the energy up, and showing up at the field offices, and showing up for the canvassing kickoff, for a specific shift, and then going out and knocking on doors. I think that's the most effective place for the candidate to be, and towards and really, I think there's this concept of knocking through to the very end. People that get in line right minutes before the polls close can stay in line and can vote after the polls close. So, always on the Obama campaigns that I worked on in '08 and in 12, we were always on election day knocking on doors, at the time that the polls were closing, because we were trying to turn out every last voter. And I believe on your campaign as well.
Uh-huh.
I
We
remember
did. We
being
did. I
out there
remember,
at the
yeah,
very in the last half hour, and
sprinting from house
actually
to
talking to
house.
a few people,
Hmm.
and getting them to go vote very, very late in the day. And when you win by 14 votes, that those last few people mattered, and that's a very rewarding experience.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty sure some of those people came out in the last 10 minutes before the polls closed.
Yeah, yeah.
So yeah, don't waste any minute.
So that's what the candidates should be doing, not wasting any minute and just being out there. Um, and then we talked a little bit about poll watching. I think poll watching is going to be important at the end of the day too, to get those vote counts, particularly if you're in running in a smaller local race. You're not going to be able to flip on CNN and like get the returns at your election night party. Usually now there's a Board of Elections website that's refreshing the results in real time. So you got a bunch of people at a field office that are kind of huddled around the computer, with the one volunteer that's like furiously refreshing the page. I've had a lot of those. But also had the experience of working in local races where the results don't get posted until like the next day, and so you're actually counting on the actual vote count from the polls, which can be released to like to a certified poll watcher, and actually doing the tabulation back at HQ yourself. I've experienced that as well in some races. But having that infrastructure, knowing how you're going to get how your supporters are going to get information about the race is important. Having as a candidate, having a victory speech and a concession speech planned, being able to go out to the office and say, hey, we gave it our best, but well, it wasn't enough this time, and we'll keep fighting. You should be prepared for that, because that's going to be a very hard moment. And you should be prepared for the loss, because it does happen quite a bit. Um, and also just thinking through the same with the concession speech and the victory speech. What's the press release version of that look like? A lot of people, campaigns stand down the day after the election. The money runs out. If you were doing it right, you spent all your money, like, and you're basically out of money the day after the election. So just remembering some of the things that you'll need the day after: cleanup, and a press release, and any sort of social media content or email that you want to send. Just making sure that there's a couple people that are still sticking around, and are have agreed to help you with that stuff, is important, because especially after a loss, you'd be surprised how quickly it is to find people that are available.
Right, right. And we're going to spend a little bit of time in the next episode talking about the sort of post-election day. What are the kind of possible pathways there? So there's one or two things I wanted to go back on that you said here. One is I just want to remind, for people that are listening or watching these, who really haven't had the experience of being involved in politics before. Just want to make sure that everybody knows that as a candidate or as a political party, or I believe, at least in New Jersey, as an issue advocacy organization, if you have like a question on the ballot, that you are allowed these poll watchers or challengers. That is a legal right that you have. They often, I think, or maybe always, have to be certified ahead of time by the county, but it's pretty easy to do and can happen pretty soon up to the election. But make sure you avail yourself of that, because that allows you to put officials at the districts where people are voting in the polling locations, and they are allowed to get those the numbers, as Aaron mentioned. So you do have that right as a candidate to do that, and it's worth looking into that in whatever county that, or state that you live in, to make sure you know all the rules there. And on election day, one of the funny things too. So that the victory or concession speech, that's probably happening at an event that you're hosting, right? And so that's one last thing that you've got to be organizing in your campaign is you really want everybody who's worked on your campaign to be coming together that night. Once the polls are closed, there's really not much else to do for most campaigns, and you're going to have a ton of people who put a lot of time in, and it's worth making sure to feed all of them well and give a space for everybody to be together when the results come in. Right, and that result could happen quickly, as Aaron mentioned. Most voting machine, it's tabulated relatively quickly these days, but not all the time. And for example, on my race, we didn't know the results election night. And I did have a victory and a concession speech plan. I did not have a we don't know the results speech planned. That was not an option. I had no idea what was going to happen on election day. If I was going to get blown out in a landslide, if I was going to win by a little, I had no idea. But one of the things I just didn't really think about was not knowing the results. And so that was a really interesting evening. And in a town like in South Orange, where the votes are being kind of added up, they might be in the municipal building where the clerk is, and you might want to make yourself at least aware of who's there and what's happening, and so that you can watch that being tabulated, for instance, or you can see if your opponent is there, or if there's media there. That's a good chance. I remember watching things getting tabulated. So we got a text message, a kind of frantic text message or phone call from one of our superstar volunteers, who let me know that my opponent was there, and he was a little unsure of whether everything was kind of happening in the way that it's supposed to be. I'll put it that way. And so I kind of ran over there from Cryans, where we were in South Orange. But there was the local paper was there, and it was a chance to kind of chat about things a little bit while the results were coming in, which on this race was certainly one of the most nail-biting elections I've ever seen, where I was up by 1, and then my opponent was up by 2, and then I was up by 3. And we ended the night not knowing who was going to win the election because it was so close. I think I was up by maybe 11 votes at the end of the night. And went over the next day to the county clerk, and what they were planning on doing. This was after, staying up, I don't know, until 5 in the morning or something, 6 in the morning that night, celebrating our uncertainty. And what ended up happening was that they were able to call it because there were fewer absentee or provisional ballots than my lead was. So I think I was up by 11 maybe, and there were 7 absentee ballots that hadn't been counted. So the clerk was comfortable calling the election because there was no way to sway the direction based on those ballots.
It's a very timely story given what our country just lived through
It is.
very
It's
recently.
true. And to make it even more timely, what ended up happening was after the county clerk, called the election for me and called the newspapers and everybody, that was all written up that way. And, I was on TV. I remember joking with one of my friends. So if she's watching this, she'll get a laugh out of this, that I was so sure that after election day, win or lose, I could go on vacation for a couple days. I was like planning on going to upstate New York and unplugging for a day or two and just like relaxing. And she was like, maybe if you lose, you can do that, but certainly not if you win. And of course, that turned out to be true. But the funny thing is, so after the media called it and after the county clerk called it, my opponent actually didn't concede. And so they had mentioned, they had identified they were pursuing some legal challenges for recounts, which with most voting machines these days isn't really a thing. They are electronically tabulated in the machine. There really isn't a lot that you can do unless there's, part of the complication today is there's so many write-in ballots that are being counted more manually. So a recount, in theory, maybe could produce some minor different result, although that's pretty rare to happen, that it affects the outcome. But when you're 12 votes, anything could matter. So anyway, she had challenged, put out for the legal challenge and ended up having maybe one of the most, maybe the second most or first most awkward conversation of that campaign. The other one being when I called the sitting mayor and let him know that I was planning on running. That might have been the first awkward conversation. And the second one was calling my opponent after winning because a couple days had gone by and she hadn't conceded. So that all did end up getting worked out in a sort of amicable way, which is good. No matter whether you win or lose, I like to think that all of us who participate in this process have a respect for the process, and have a respect for the rule of law, and have a respect for the people who for years and decades and centuries have upheld, the credibility and validity of the elections in this country. But that was an interesting taste of it from my perspective. So didn't get the results the next day. And then for those of you who aren't familiar with South Orange, I'll leave one last comment here about it, which is it's very unique in that the election is on the second Tuesday in May and you get sworn in the following Monday. So it's only a 5 or 6 day turnaround between the election. There's no time for transition. Often there's about a 2-month period in most places. So election night happened, and they called it, and I'm that day going into meetings to get downloaded on things that are happening that I need to be aware of for the next week. So it's a really crazy process. But if you do all the right things, we've tried to cover a lot of the bases here. If you do all the right things, election day is, for the candidate, for friends, for family, for volunteers, I mean, it's an unbelievably exciting day. And just sitting back for a moment and thinking about the fact that we have access to this in the country that we live in this time that we live in, that people actually vote. And outside of the presidential election with the Electoral College, people are deciding. And it's really amazing to be part of the whole process there. And so I'll stop now because I'm going to get too sentimental with all of this. But Aaron, is there anything major you think we didn't cover for the kind of election day activities?
No, I don't think so. I think that covered everything. And yeah, I mean, I think that, take the opportunity to take it all in, because it is a very special moment, particularly right around that time. The last couple hours you're out in the field, and then when the polls close, and then getting the results, win or lose. It's really, for me, I've had just as much fun on campaigns that I've lost than and ones that I've won, and made equally great friends and lifelong allies. So I just say, remember to take it all in and enjoy it, because it's few times in a lifetime.
Indeed, that is true. All right, so far here we've covered a little bit of the overall election day strategy, making sure you're getting people out to the polls, making sure you're collecting the data about who's voting and what turnout is happening in what precincts or districts, so that if you need to make adjustments as you go throughout the day, you have the ability to do so, which is really important. Making sure that as a candidate, you are out being visible, talking to people, whatever way you think is best for your particular campaign, making sure that volunteers are happy and supported, and just, keeping that last minute enthusiasm and energy level up, because elections, I'm living proof, elections can come down to, almost a single digit number of votes. And so, if you're looking at your watch and there's 5 minutes left and there's one more house, get to it. There's really no time to waste here. And making sure you've got your election night event ready, whether you're hosting it in your home or a local restaurant or bar or something like that. And then what your rights are as kind of a candidate, as far as getting access to the numbers as they're coming in, making sure you are kind of watching that. In the next episode, we'll talk a little bit about what happens if you win and what happens if you lose, to try to get you set up right for whatever the next steps are, because whatever they are, this process that you've just gone through is probably going to change your life in really positive ways. And so, like Aaron said, in some way, a loss isn't necessarily a loss here, and a win isn't even necessarily a win. So I want to thank you, Aaron, again for joining here and talking us through all of this. And for those of you watching, hopefully, again, this has been a helpful overview of some of these topics. If there are things that you want to hear more about, please go to my website at rethinkingwithalextorpey.com. Let me know what you want to hear more about, and maybe there can be some more episodes in the future drilling down on some areas. So thanks again, Aaron, and thanks again, everybody, for watching and listening.